Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dreaming in Symbols, the podcast dedicated to looking at spirituality, religion, mythology, and psychology from a non reductive, psycho-spiritual, esoteric perspective. Um, I'm your host, Colin. Aussie CDA is my channel. And just wanted to start with some quick announcements. This is not the usual time that I do the broadcast. I've been trying to do Saturdays starting at 4:30, and I've been typically been doing the shows for about an hour and a half. Well, I started to realize that I didn't want to do it for that long, and so I've had some thoughts about the format of the show in terms of how long do I want each episode to be, and I decided that I want each episode to be 1 hour instead of an hour and a half. I think an hour and a half is a long time for all of you to hear the sound of my voice, and probably by the time we get to an hour, I'm sort of done, and I think most people are done at that point. So I just wanted to mention from the beginning that starting today and moving on into the future, the shows will only be an hour. We might extend it out if I've got a really good discussion going with a guest, but until that happens, I'm just not going to do more than an hour. Another thing that I've been toying with the idea is I still want to broadcast the shows here on Google Hangout, but I also been thinking about investing in um, uh, Blog Talk Radio, if any of you are familiar with that. And I thought that it might be a better format, actually, because one thing that gets difficult for me, and I admit that this might just be me being lazy, toggling between different social media, like trying to pay attention to Facebook and Twitter. When I'm asking if people want to call in, I feel like that gets sort of tedious after a while, and so I thought that it might actually be better if I do Blog Talk Radio, because that way, I'll still record on Google Hangout, but Blog Talk Radio, it's like it's one thing, right? So people can call in. I'll actually have a number that people can call in, and that way, people, it just streamlines everything, and people can still leave comments. I'll still encourage people to leave comments and whatnot, but on YouTube and elsewhere and other social media, but I just felt like it was a better decision to switch platforms. So I haven't done that yet. I've actually started a Blog Talk Radio account, and so if you look at my YouTube channel on the main page, you'll see the various symbols for my blog, my WordPress blog, and Twitter and Facebook, and you'll see the Blog Talk Radio symbol. And when you click on that, it'll bring you to my Blog Talk Radio channel, and that's where you'll be able to call in, and that will be the main platform for the show. So I don't know when I'll be announcing the switch or the addition to, I should say, well before I do another show. I'm also thinking of doing more than one show per week, which might at this point seem rather funny, considering that my schedule has been so busy that I haven't been able to do consistent Saturdays for a while. But there are certain days during the week, an hour on certain days where I might be able to pull off doing, I would probably just do like 2 shows a week top. So I appreciate any feedback, that if anyone wants to give me feedback about should I do more than one show. So that would be 2 hours a week, one hour one day, 1 hour another day, and also what you all think of Blog Talk Radio. Do you think that would be broadcasting on Blog Talk Radio, streamlining the comments or the calls so people can actually call in addition to recording it on Google Hangout? Let me know what you all think of that. So the topic today is an interesting one, I hope. Kind of switching gears. If you've been paying attention to my Twitter feed, or my Goodreads, you've seen that I've been reading books by and about Thelema the philosophy of Thelema, or Aleister Crowley, the man who is considered by some to be the most wicked, he was called the wickedest man alive when he was living. Crowley was around during the 20th century. He actually paralleled the life of Carl Jung in terms of dates and whatnot. Basically, late 1800s, early 1900s. Died in 1947, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been reading about him, and I have been meeting Thelemites and members of the OTO, which is the initiatic order for this sort of esoteric group. And some of you might be scratching your head going, well, why have I been doing this? Well, because I am a Swedenborgian, and there are folks that I know personally who are members of the OTO, and I was invited to go to a OTO lodge and check it out, and attend what they called their Gnostic Mass, which was fascinating, and it's been a fascinating journey to actually learn firsthand about Crowley and about the OTO and the law of Thelema, and so I'm very new at this. I've been reading a few biographies on Crowley. I'm currently reading one called Perdurabo, Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley by Richard Kaczynski, Kaczynski. So far, the best biography of Crowley so far. I've read two others previous to this, and I've got one more after this. So if you've been paying attention to my Goodreads and my blog, or Twitter, you'll see that I've been reading a lot about Aleister Crowley and Thelema. There's a lot of misconceptions about Crowley. I've kind of had a strange experience with Aleister Crowley in the OTO. So when I was like in middle school, so I was about 12 or 13 years old, and my mom, who raised me Catholic, she was not a strict Catholic. So she was always really into the mystics. And I promise this does have to do with part of the topic today. I'm going to talk about religious experience, and I didn't want to say versus belief, but is there a difference between religious experience and religious belief? Yeah. And so, my mom was much more interested in the Catholic mystics, or the Christian mystics. And she read all mystics, and she had a very, she didn't have an exclusivist attitude towards religion. I think that probably has a lot to do with why, for me, even when I was a Orthodox Sunni Muslim, I was never fully an exclusivist, and at least in the way that I've seen other Muslims and Catholics, for that matter, who have argued a more exclusivist attitude. And so she not only looked into Catholicism, she looked into all religion. I think I got kind of the seeds of my organized, or my comparative religion bug was probably from my mother. And she, one thing that she was really into studying was the tarot, and she looked at it really from a psychological perspective. And she essentially, I was seeing tarot cards even when I was a kid, and it was never like this, kind of Hollywood, like, ooh, fortune telling type tarot card. I mean, she really looked at it as a psychological tool, and indeed, a number of Jungian psychoanalysts have written about the archetypal nature of tarot and how you can use it as a tool to understand the deeper dynamics of your own psyche. And so, I grew up looking at the tarot, and I remember, I had a small stint when I was, in middle school, and at that point, I didn't really consider myself a Christian, except maybe by name. And I started looking into other religions in a very mild way. And this is a period of my life that I actually haven't, really talked very much about, because it was brief. And by the time I got into high school, I was starting to read the Bible from cover to cover for the first time, really, at least right around freshman year, 8th grade, give or take. But I kind of had a little stint into what you might call Wicca or New Ageism. It was right around the same time that I started reading the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And if those of you who have read Lovecraft, you know that there's a lot of occult and supernatural things that are mentioned. And not that Lovecraft was actually an atheist. He didn't actually believe any of this stuff was true. But my imagination was on fire about people worshiping deities, and he makes references to real things like Blavatsky and other things. And at this time in my life, these were just kind of names, and it was was exciting for me to see, you know, to see, uh, references in Lovecraft and actually see that they were real, right? So when you're a kid, that makes things really, really fascinating and exciting, at least for me, that I could see that there was actually real things that Lovecraft was writing about. Of course, I really wanted the Necronomicon to be real, and I bought books that claimed to be the Necronomicon, and I think a huge part of me knew that it was bullshit. But when you're a kid, you really want this stuff to be real. And so one thing that I did is I started researching Wicca and modern day witchcraft, and also excuse me. The tarot for myself, and in the town that I lived in when I was in middle school, there was a small shop that was a Wicca shop, and it no longer is in business. And I would go to this shop, and they would sell incense, and you could buy kind of new agey things, and there was Wicca, and I remember in tarot cards, and I remember talking to the woman there, and she was a Wiccan or a neo-pagan. She belonged to a coven of sorts, and I talked to her, and I kind of had this fascination with this very nature-based goddess worship type thing, which was so different. I mean, if you think about, from my perspective, I was raised Roman Catholic. So here I had this very big emphasis on the masculine principle, on the dying God, and rising deity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, even though I won't claim that even when I was a young Catholic that I fully understood Catholic theology. I think that was abundantly, or Catholic history for that matter, looking back at some of my early YouTube videos from 2007, where I'm trying to refute Jay Smith and Venom Fang X. Well, I'll say that I still can put myself in my own shoes back then and think that I probably did a pretty good job against Venom Fang X. But some of my really old videos where I was attacking Jay Smith about the Council of Nicaea and Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code 101, I was I was woefully ignorant of actual legit Catholic history and theology. And maybe if I had known more about Catholic theology, I probably, who knows? Well, anyway, and as far as the quantum physicists go, in a parallel dimension, I'm still a Catholic. But anyway, so I was fascinated by this whole New Age Wiccan thing, and even though I never became a Wiccan, I studied it briefly when I was 12 or 13. But one thing that I did, because I know I've gone off on a tangent here, the thing that I did at the age of 12 or 13 is I bought the Thoth Tarot deck, the Aleister Crowley Tarot deck, and a deck, and also his book that goes with it. And I remember I was fascinated by it. I remember looking through the cards. I remember kind of studying what some of them meant. And so I had, in middle school, I had a stint where I made serious study of the tarot. But the thing is, when I read Crowley at that time, I never bothered to go beyond that book or beyond the tarot. It just, I don't know if I just didn't realize that there was more to it. You have to realize this is still during the age of dial-up internet. Yes, I am of that particular age and part of the millennial. I don't even know if I can consider myself a millennial, but I didn't grow up with, I had to deal with dial-up. I can still remember AOL and instant messenger and all that stuff, so it wasn't really I don't know why, frankly. I don't know why I didn't do more research. The only other reference I had to Aleister Crowley was the song Mr. Crowley by Ozzy Osbourne, because right around the time when I turned 10 or 11, I really got into rock and roll. So, but what's funny is I kept the deck, I kept the book, but after middle school, I shelved it, and I never really did anything with it. I mean, occasionally if someone brought up tarot, I'd be like, oh yeah, I have a tarot deck. And I bought a few different decks throughout those couple years, and I still have them. And but it only came up very randomly after 7th and 8th grade. But my study of Crowley ceased at that point. I didn't really do any serious study. So mid last year, give or take, 2015, a fellow Swedenborgian that I know essentially said, "Hey, I'm a member of of the OTO, and I go to this local lodge, and you should come, because he, at that time, he knew that I was interested in studying. I'm still interested in studying comparative religion, but I started to get into studying esotericism and hermeticism, as well as more mysticism. A lot of those isms that are usually rejected by mainstream orthodoxy. And I was fascinated by this. So I went with my friend to one of the Gnostic masses, and it was a fascinating experience. I was really, really genuinely amazed by it. And what was amazing about being there is I started hearing, obviously, my friends telling me on the ride over, about this. And he didn't really give me very much to go on. He really wanted it to be kind of a surprise. He didn't want to ruin anything for me. But one thing that he mentioned was Aleister Crowley. And I went, Crowley? You mean like Mr. Crowley? Like Ozzy Osbourne's Mr. Crowley? And I think Crowley had come up in a few other references over the past few years. But I never really made serious attempts at trying to understand who Crowley was. And so, when we get to the OTO lodge, there's references to the Book of the Law. And funny, I had actually, now that now I'm going to contradict myself, because I remember I actually did buy a copy of the Book of the Law. I don't know where I got it, though. It's the small red paperback copy of the Book of the Law, which Crowley claimed he was inspired to write. And I read it once, and I just thought, well, that was interesting. I put it down. I think I may have been in high school. And at the time, I must have saw a reference to it somewhere. I don't know if it was Lovecraft or somewhere, and I got myself a copy, but I don't remember where. And I started hearing people tell, the references to the Book of the Law. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Isn't that small little book that I have that I only read once years ago? And, suddenly it was like all these dots started to connect, and I was like, holy crap, this is the stuff that has been sitting on my shelf for a long time, and suddenly it's like, oh wow. So I started to realize that I actually didn't know much about Crowley or Thelema or the OTO or any of that stuff. And so my friend let me borrow a few books, and I want to share some of those books. So I already mentioned, the Perdurabo biography of Crowley. Another book that was fantastic, and I bought myself a copy recently, was called Living Thelema by David Shoemaker. Excellent book. This is an excellent introduction to Thelema, and he looks at it from a psychospiritual perspective. David Shoemaker is a clinical psychologist, Jungian-oriented clinical psychologist, and also cognitive behavioral. This person was speaking my language, because here we have comparative religion, right? Because Crowley was into studying comparative religion, comparative mysticism. Also yoga, using different initiatic symbolic methodology, psychology. He read Carl Jung and Freud. And the tarot. And so it's like, oh wow, so all this stuff that I've appreciated throughout my life is sandwiched into this philosophy, the spirituality called Thelema, or at least as far as David Shoemaker presented it. As I've continued to actually read read Crowley for myself in greater detail, I can see that it's really a fascinating thing to be reading, and really inspiring. And and this is really, I think, this is in the category of new religious movements. And some people consider Swedenborgianism to be a new religious movement, NRM. And so it's post-orthodoxy sort of groups that have sort of kind of cropped up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that have roots in kind of parent religions, if you will. And so it was just a very fascinating thing to be exposed to, and I continue to enjoy reading about it. But the thing that I kept running into, and this is something that I don't know if anybody else has really written about it, and I probably will do a blog post on this subject, is the concept of the divine as the sun. And there is because Crowley talks about the sun as a symbol for the divine, and says that every man, every woman is a star, and that really it's like we have a connection to the infinite within ourself, the deeper parts of ourself. And this language sounded very familiar to me. It sounded very much like Swedenborg, and it sounded very much like Carl Jung. And I've been reading in a discussion group that I belong to, Swedenborgian discussion group. I belong to. We've been reading Swedenborg's book Divine Love and Wisdom, and a huge part of that book is describing how God manifests in heaven, or in the other world, the world of spirits, as a sun. The sun is a symbol for God, and I found that Crowley also describes the divine in such a way as well. He uses Egyptian mythology and symbols from Egyptian mythology to kind of talk about this in terms of excuse me, Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and Ra, Horus being the sun, and just many different parallels. And David Shoemaker wrote an article that is a book review of Carl Jung's The Red Book. And so I was happy to see that somebody out there, because I always get this feeling like, no, there's no way I'm the first person to come, think of these connections, right? And David Shoemaker, in his review of The Red Book, did make connections to Crowley in terms of the passing of different aeons. And Swedenborg talked about this too. So this idea that humanity was in one sort of consciousness at one point, and then we pass on to a different one, and now we're in a different one. And all three of these men, Crowley, Swedenborg, and Jung, talked about this very openly. The thing that strikes me, though, is how similar the Red Book experience really is to Crowley. So Shoemaker talks about, the child archetype and a new God, subjectively speaking, being born in the individual. And he says that this is very similar to Crowley as well. But there's one thing that I don't think he mentioned in the article, and I wanted to read at the end of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung's autobiography. He publishes in the 5th appendix his 7 Sermons to the Dead, which is a modified version of the sermons as they occur in the Red Book. They're much more extensive in the Red Book, but I'd like to read parts of the 7 sermons as they are in the finalized version that appear in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, because there is a lot of similarity. So for an example, in sermon number 2, and there's no verse number, but sermon number 2, he says, really close to the end of it, he says, this is a God. So he's talking about God and this, God and devil. He says, this is a God, small g, whom ye knew not, for mankind forgot it. We name it by its name, Aberrax. It is more indefinite still than God and devil. That God may be distinguished from it. We know God Helios, or sun, with a capital S. Aberrax is effect. Nothing standeth opposed to it but the ineffective. Hence its effective nature freely unfoldeth itself. So he's making references to Helios, or the sun, in the 7 Sermons to the Dead. But skipping, and so this is a symbol for the divine. Skipping down to Sermon 3, I think. He says here, yes, in Sermon 3, he says, God dwelleth behind the sun, the devil behind the night. What God bringeth forth out of the light, the devil sucketh into the night. But Aberrax is the world, its becoming and its passing. Upon every gift that cometh from the God's Son, the devil layeth his curse. Everything that ye entreat from the God's Son begetteth as a deed of the devil. Everything that ye create from the God's Son giveth effective power to the devil. That is terrible Aberrax. It continues on. So, there's a lot of these parallels here to Crowley and the concept of the sun, and the sun being a symbol for the divine as well. At another point, he does mention uh, stars. If I can find it, because he's talking about spirituality, and at one point he does say something about. Here we go. In Sermon 7, he says here, man is a gateway through which from the outer world of gods, daemons, and souls ye pass into the inner world. Out of the greater into the smaller world, small and transitory is man. Already is he behind you, and once again ye find yourselves in endless space, in the smaller, innermost infinity. At immeasurable distance standeth one single star, with a capital S, in the zenith. This is the one God of this one man. This is his world, his plamora, his divinity. In this world is man Abarex, the creator and destroyer of his own world. This star is the God and goal of man. This is his one guiding God. In him goeth man to his rest. Towards him goeth the long journey of the soul after death. In him shineth forth as light all that man bringeth back from the greater world. To this one God man shall pray. Prayeth increaseth the light of the star. It casteth a bridge over death. It prepareth life for the smaller world and assuage the hopeless desires of the greater. When the greater world waxeth cold, burneth the star. Between man and his one God there standeth nothing, so long as man can turn away his eyes from the flaming spectacle of Abarex. Man here, God there. Weakness and nothingness here, their eternally creative power. Here nothing but darkness and chilling moisture, their holy sun. So, to me, I had read Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Oh, man. First time back in 2007, 2008, I think. I'll never forget reading the Seven Sermons to the Dead, because it was a fascinating experience to read that and consider that very innermost esoteric teaching that Jung, psychospiritual teaching that Jung wrote during the critical moment in which he did the Red Book. And the fact that Swedenborg and Crowley also described the divine as, in these very hermetical terms, and Gnostic terms, as far as the divine being represented as the sun, which is an ancient symbol, of course, and also a star. This is something that is not arbitrary language, but it's something that is mentioned by all three men. And so we have this connection, this archetypal connection to this very ancient belief of the divine as represented by the symbol of the sun, which is a star, obviously. And so I just think that that's fascinating. I mean, Swedenborg was in the 1700s. Crowley and Jung were contemporaries of each other. There's no evidence that they met. Crowley only read Jung's symbols of transformation, and it's a fascinating thing to see that both men were pretty much on the same track in terms of the inner dimensions of humankind's psyche, and the connection between the inner reaches of the mind and connection to the spiritual. And I think that is just fantastic to see that type of connection going on. These parallels, rather. And so I really it's been a joyous experience for me to be reading Crowley in particular and continuing my studies of Swedenborg. And this is just one example. So I'm probably going to do a blog post in the future that really just has these quotes that you can all read, these parallels between Swedenborg, Jung, and Crowley in terms of the divine as represented by the symbol of the sun and a star. So yeah, that is one of the main topics that I really wanted to talk about today. in terms of a topic. Now, some of you, I've received messages from people asking me about Klingshore. I hope to have Klingshore back on the show at some point. I know that he, from my understanding, is very busy. I know on his public Twitter account, he said that he's sort of kind of giving himself a reboot. And you may have noticed that his Klingshore channel is gone, and he's sort of his Researching Islam channel in blog is the main thing that he's doing right now. So I hope to have him back on the show at some point to continue our discussion of early Islam. And so another thing that I just wanted to talk about. So let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any other books. So yeah, I've got some books like hanging around here. Living Thelema by David Shoemaker. Another book that I haven't read yet, but it was recommended as a good introduction, Initiation in the Aeon of the Child, The Inward Journey by J. Daniel Gunther. Again, emphasis on parallel to Carl Jung in Jungian psychology, as well as Thelema as well. Prudurabo by Richard Kaczynski, etc. So, couple things I wanted to talk about here. One thing in particular is been reading for my master's thesis. So I'm in my last semester of my counseling, master's of counseling program. Been reading by the British Jungian analyst Michael Fordham, and Michael Fordham in his book, which I couldn't find on Goodreads for some reason, but it's must be a pretty old book. That hasn't really been seen very much reprinting, but it's called The Objective Psyche. And he has this whole article, a few different essays in here. And in one, he talks about analytical psychology and religious experience. And he really talks about the difference between how psychology of religion operates and how what he calls mysticism operates. And in this essay, and also in an essay called The Dark Night of the Soul, he talks about, he uses St. John of the Cross in The Dark Night of the Soul as a bridge between, he actually goes so far as to call St. John of the Cross, essentially, without knowing it, he was an early analyst. He paid attention to the experiences of the subjective psyche, and really talks about, his work is parallel to what we find in Jung's approach to the process of individuation. And so, but one thing that he talks about is analytical psychology can look at, it has an interest in subjective experiences, has an interest in looking at religious experience. It doesn't try to understand, and so it tries to look at the psychology behind ritual, behind certain symbols, behind myths, behind legends, behind spiritual stories, the Bible, the Quran, scripture, etc. And essentially, the one thing that Jungian psychology can't do, as far as the psychology of religion, is it can't really comment on metaphysics. So it leaves the question of metaphysics to theologians and to philosophers. And Jung himself made a regular practice of this. There was very few moments where he was willing to out and out talk about metaphysical concepts, like what he actually might believe, because from his perspective, what was most important was having an understanding of the self, the archetype of the self, which he termed the God archetype, the God image. And he really said that, to know God, the best way to do this is, in terms of our limited psyche, is to understand the God within, or the self archetype. That's why he famously said, I don't believe in God, I know. I don't need to believe. But he wasn't meaning that as a metaphysical statement. He was meaning that as a psychological statement. And we could see St. John of the Cross, getting very close to this in terms of the subjective experience that the psyche of man has with its union with the divine. And I feel that, so Michael Fordham is saying that the discussions of metaphysics should be in the hands of theologians and philosophers and not analysts. But the irony is, what do you do with people who are theologians and also analysts? And I'm kind of speaking personally here because I have been accepted to go to seminary, and I will be getting my Master's of Divinity, hoping to, and I'll be certified in Swedenborgian theology, hoping to become an ordained Swedenborgian minister and theologian, and also pick up a certificate in Islamic studies as well. And, so I find myself, I wrestle with this constantly, the concept of how much do I really just believe or have faith in versus my psychological approach to things. Because I also plan on, I hope to become a certified Jungian psychoanalyst after I'm licensed as a licensed psychotherapist. And so, I very much find myself kind of going back and forth between what do I have faith in terms of metaphysics, and what are the things that I'm willing to say this is a psychological discussion that I'm having about symbols of the psyche and things like this. It's all wrapped around with spirituality. And this is kind of the point that I mentioned with my mom, right, earlier, is it's about experience. It's about behavior. It's about the subjective experience that people have, the spiritual experiences that people have, which people can talk about this in religious terms, metaphysical terms, psychological terms. We can all look at this from so many different angles. And I like doing that. And that's sort of something that kind of, it feels like I'm juggling these things around in my own mind. But I think it's interesting in this essay, Michael Fordham's like, look, as an analytical psychologist or a Jungian analyst, I can't really talk about the metaphysics of these things because that's in the realm of theology and philosophy. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, my goal, my future is to become, is to be a theologian and a Jungian analyst. So, I just sort of talking out loud about this, but I'm wondering, if other people find themselves having moments where they're kind of looking at topics of God, the afterlife, or all of these stories and myths from these different angles. I wonder, I'm just putting it out there, how many people don't just look at these things from one perspective, because I find that a lot of people do only look at it from one perspective. That's the thing that kind of frustrates me, right? So when we think about the professor of psychology of religion, Dr. Wolff, W-U-L-F-F, and his graph that I've talked about in a few other episodes here on this show and in other videos, you can plot yourself on this graph. You're either, two categories exclude the possibility of spirituality or metaphysics. The other embraces it, but how they do it is different. One's very reductive. One is not reductive, right? And so I find that the two camps that get the most airtime, as I've said many times on the show, is reductionists who deny the idea of spirituality and metaphysics, but then you've got the people who are for sure like, yes, there is this metaphysical reality, but they're rather dogmatic about it. And this is kind of your typical kind of hardcore religious fundamentalists. I'm more in line with camps 3 and 4. Camp 3 is still kind of reductive. This is sort of classical psychology of religion. This is what Michael Fordham would say. Michael Fordham would say, to some extent, that it's sort of, it doesn't really do us any good to talk about the metaphysical reality, because we can't really go beyond what our own consciousness is. We can have these experiences, but we're working with this dynamic of the psyche, and that's the dynamic that we should be focusing on. Analytical psychology, though, is so close to the dividing line between Camp 3 and Camp 4. And Camp 4 would say, yes, we're paying attention to symbols. Yes, we're paying attention to the psyche of humans. But by doing that, we are saying that there is a way to connect with these metaphysical concepts. So I kind of am right in the middle of these two. And I have I read some things, I have some experiences, and it confirms for me that, yeah, there is something greater. I mean, I never doubt that, but I start thinking these things in terms of sort of classical metaphysics or theology. But then I'm also quick to talk about things how Joseph Campbell would or Carl Jung would, because both sides appeal to me. But I'm also okay with looking at how Freud argued against religion, or I'm curious to study how fundamentalists look at their faith. And so I'm just curious how many people really do tap dance around some of these different camps, or why do people feel comfortable only in one, as another example. Just something to think about. So one thing that I did recently is I watched, and I wrote a blog post about this, that was, about, it was a debate between Jay Smith and Adnan Rashid. I want to pull up the clip because I want to play some of it. I responded to it on my WordPress blog, but I just want to illustrate this conversation about camps and debating metaphysics. So they were debating the Birmingham manuscripts, and I just want to play a little bit of this just to kind of illustrate what I said in my blog post, which is they're kind of talking past each other here. So this is Jay Smith versus Adnan Rashid Speaker's Corner Debates from P. Fanner Films, which I think is Jay Smith's channel. And I'm going to play this clip here.
Then everything they believe is false. Because we know this is hugely important. This is hugely important for Muslims. Because everything they're dependent on is whether the dates go back to Uthman. That's why he has to say I lied. Thank God I don't have to lie. Thank God I don't have to lie. Because we don't have this Bible with the Bible. Thank God we don't have it. Go ahead.
I will read now. First of all, his rank has now ended. Now let me make a point. He has not read Nikolai Sinai. He has not.
No, I haven't. You're right. So send it to me.
So you are not.
So send it to me.
So you are not aware of the most recent scholars.
So hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
Is that
I am aware of the most recent scholars, because I am aware of what Dan Brubaker has found, which you have not answered today. You have refused to answer Dan Brubaker's corrections. So I have, and that's from last year as well.
Unbelievable. It is absolutely amazing to meet a gentleman like this who lies thinking people are fools.
Here we go again.
His job is to make him lie. This man is standing here making claims on the Quran when he is not even aware of the scholarship.
Show us a proof that Sinai has dated these to the time of Uthman. And where did he date him? Go ahead, read it.
Nikolai Sinai.
I'm not crying yet.
The Bulletin of School of Oriental and African.
Go ahead, where has he said it?
The year 2014, and he states, there are nevertheless good reasons to believe.
And what are those good reasons?
That for that good reason. This is his conclusion. This is his conclusion. For reasons, go and read the article.
We're going to read it. We're going to come back next week.
Okay, so I want to pause for a second here, and I know I commented on this on my blog, but I just find this fascinating watching this again. And I know that Adnan Rashid actually saw. I posted when I posted my blog articles. I put them on Twitter, and I tagged him in it, so I know he saw it. And I essentially said that Jay Smith won this debate. Now, it's ironic because back in 2007, I was trying to refute Jay Smith. I certainly don't agree with everything that Jay Smith says, about many things. But I mean, it's fun for me at this point in my life to watch these debates because I have no dog to lose in these fights. I'm not a nominal Orthodox Christian, Protestant or Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And I'm not a Muslim anymore. So it's fun for me to just kind of like pop some popcorn and watch these two perspectives kind of go at it. And the thing that's amazing about this is Adnan Rashid is saying, okay, well, this scholar, Professor Sinai of Oxford, says there's good reason to believe that the Birmingham manuscripts can be dated back to the time of Uthman. Now, I'm not going to accuse IERA or the members of IERA of doing this, but I've seen people accuse the members of IERA of quote mining things. And I kind of had a little experience with this when there was the whole Dr. Petrovich scenario that was brought up by Essence of Thought, the YouTuber Essence of Thought, that, IERA was making these, they were quoting or trying to say that, Dr. Petrovich did extensive research on the innateness, supposedly, of belief. And Essence of Thought brought up, like, you're quote mining this, or you're only reading off titles. You're not, and there was that whole fiasco, right? Well, I kind of see Adnan doing that here in his debate with Jay Smith. He just quotes one part of this article, and he goes, "Oh, see, the article says there's good reason to believe that the manuscripts go back to the time of Uthman." And Jay Smith's standing there going, "What are those good reasons?" Great question. Excellent question. What are the good reasons? I'd be saying the same thing. In fact, when I was watching the debate, I was like, okay, and he's going to tell us the good reasons, right? Nope. He just tells Jay Smith, no. It's 100 pages. I'll just send it to you. This was posted back in 2015. And as I said in my blog post article, I don't know whether they've had a debate since about this topic. That's why I tagged Adnan in it, because I was kind of thinking maybe Adnan was going to say something to, and as far as I can tell, he hasn't responded to me directly about this debate and the topic and my reflections on it. But why is this important? Well, it's important because, again, this camp, and I would kind of lump Jay Smith and Adnan Rashid into this camp. This whole thing about the textual transmission of the text is so important to them because they derive their dogma from this text. Because they literally just read the text and they apply it to dogma. They're looking for the crystallized creeds that exist. And I am so thankful, for me personally, that I don't look at things like this. If someone told me that the Quran, that the Birmingham manuscripts have a very strange dating, it wouldn't affect my perspective on the Quran at all. Because the spiritual essence that or teachings that I might get from the Quran, even though I'm not a Muslim anymore, have nothing to do with the dating of the manuscripts. Same with the Bible, right? But I find it fascinating how this is such a hot button issue for people to try and knock each other down about these manuscripts. And that's why I thought that this debate was really illuminating, just in terms of, like, what's the debate style? How are you going to convince people of the truth of your argument? That was kind of the big picture, I think. Are you just going to quote one sentence and go, well, that's it, everybody, I'm going to... No, it's like, no one expected Adnan Rashid to stand there on Speaker's Corner and read 100 pages of text to the audience, but, yeah, if you're going to bring up a 100-page article, you should probably summarize some of the key points, like what were the good reasons to believe that the manuscripts could be dated back to Uthman? What were the good reasons? But he doesn't give any. And that's unfortunate. That's why I think Jay Smith won the debate. So I think next time I do a show, so yeah, at this point we're getting kind of to the end here. I've kind of lost track of time. I think I started the show. That's one thing that's kind of funny about this. It gives me no counter to tell me how long I've been doing the show for. Kind of lost track of time. That's okay. I think I've only been going for... Well, anyway, might be a shorter show because I've kind of run out of things to talk about. But, so next Saturday, I will not be doing a show. It is my nephew's first birthday. He will be 1 year old next Saturday. And so I will not be around to do a show. I might do a show at a different time. But I want to talk next week about the symbolism of the crucifixion. this is a hot button thing here. In terms of, I want to talk about a couple things. One thing I want to talk about is how the crucifixion is represented in the Bible and the Quran, and does a literal reading of it really matter? And can we get something from a symbolic reading of it? You know, I want to talk about that because Quran chapter 7, verse 157 is a pretty hot button verse, I think, as far as Muslim and Christians and their dialogue. I also want to talk about prophecies. I want to talk about the biblical prophecies for Jesus in terms of the references to the Old Testament. I also want to talk about the supposed prophecies for Muhammad. And what are my attitudes towards these topics now? How do I approach these things? And how might you approach this topic? That's sort of where I want to take it. So it's going to be a little comparative. It's going to be Christianity and Islam next week, looking at the historicity of the crucifixion and how it's presented in Scripture, the Quran and the Bible, and literal reading of those narratives, symbolic, yes or no, and also the prophecies that foretell the coming of the Jewish Messiah and also the prophethood of Muhammad, specifically from the Bible. So I hope that those might be in some intriguing topics for you. Like I said, I'll probably be doing a blog post about the sun, the symbol of the sun. So stay tuned to that as I keep evolving my study of Thelema in the OTO and Aleister Crowley. Yeah, can't think of anything else really. So I think I'll probably just end it here. Might be ending it kind of short, but I think this is where I'm going to end it today. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope to have more guests on in the near future. And also, if you want to give me some feedback about what do you think about doing Blog Talk Radio? Should I invest doing Blog Talk Radio in addition to recording the show here on Google Hangout as well? Let me know what you all think. I appreciate the feedback, and if there's any topics you'd like me to do in future shows, I appreciate any feedback as well in that regard. So thank you all for watching. Peace be with you all.